Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today on World Vape Day. My name is Kanav Rishi Kumar. I'm here on behalf of Association of Vapers India. And joining me today is Dr. Kiran Melkote, a practicing surgeon at Fortis and director of Association for Harm Reduction Education and Research, or AHRER, a pan-India body of medical professionals and independent researchers focused on adoption of harm reduction measures in Indian tobacco control efforts. Hi, doctor. How are you doing?
Hi, Kanav. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, doctor. It's so nice to have you here today. And
It's so great to be here.
today, being World Vape Day, we wanted to have a slightly informal video which talks about an individual person's journey. Because you see, the vape ban in India, we can talk about it from a political aspect, we can talk about it from an economical aspect. But one aspect which is very often negated and not spoken about is the impact it's had on people individually, to the population of India, a 1.4 billion people's population, which is a huge population, and it's impacting a lot of them, their present and their future. So, as a medical professional with a lot of credibility, we wanted to talk to you about your journey about nicotine dependence, where it started, how it evolved, where vaping came into the picture for you, and how the ban has now impacted you at a personal level. So, with that, let's start with how old were you when you started smoking, and why you think you started smoking?
Yeah, so my journey was a little bit different than most of my friends who also smoke. So normally, largely people begin in their teens. But in my teens, I was an anti-smoking activist. In fact, I also took part in many anti-tobacco rallies organized by the IMA in Bangalore. So I am from the south. I was born and brought up in Hyderabad. I studied in Bangalore. So I joined. I joined MBBS in the year 2000 at MS Ramaya Medical College in Bangalore. So throughout the journey, there were plenty of people around me who would smoke, and I would always have very strong words for them. So finally, after my MBBS, in fact, so this was around maybe when I was late. I was around 22 when I started. This was during my internship. So the pressures of going 72-hour shifts, literally 3 days. So you're in the hospital for 3 days. You don't look at the sun for 3 days. You are indoors, and it is a very high stress job. So in those times, that is when I think it was primarily stress, but also coupled with a bit of peer pressure as well. So that's when I started smoking initially. And as time went by, see, the stress doesn't ease off. As you grow in the profession, your responsibilities pile up and your roles expand. So that will also mean added stress. You're responsible for many more sort of conditions. You're also responsible for many more people under you. So that just adds to the stress, and that led me to uh, that actually led me into the habit of smoking. And over time, so then I also worked in Bangalore for a long time, and then I moved to Delhi in the year 2013. By the year 2015, I was up to 30 cigarettes a day, sometimes 40. That's 2 packs. And yeah, so I knew it was a problem. See, I'm a doctor, yes, but uh, I think it is not just doctors, but all of us. You see, by now, all of us know the risks of smoking. All of us know the risks of tobacco. You don't have to be a doctor to know the risks of tobacco. It's written on every pack, and it's so widespread that every sort of media that you look at, every movie that is played in the theaters has a warning. So by now, I think all of us are aware of the risks of tobacco. Yet, a large number of people struggle with this habit, and it's very difficult to quit. It's not. I mean, if it were easy, you we actually wouldn't be having this debate at all. Problem with it, see, the main the main the main sort of the main sort of habit forming ingredient in tobacco is nicotine. Nicotine forms dependence, and this sort of dependence is strongest by the inhaled route. So when you actually smoke, the chances of getting a habit of for nicotine is much higher than, let's say, using a lozenge or a gum or a patch. And that is actually, if you actually look at it that way, it is a little bit counterintuitive. Because if something is habit forming, the purer the drug, the more should be the sort of habit forming nature of it. So if you look at a nicotine pouch or a nicotine lozenge or a gum available in the pharmacies, that's pure nicotine. But the habit forming potential is exceedingly low. In fact, it's non existent, it's not been reported so far. But the same nicotine, when it is there in the form of tobacco and you smoke it or you chew it, suddenly it becomes habit forming. So, that's where many of the topmost researchers in the world, so they have realized that it's actually not correct to call it nicotine dependence. It may be more appropriate to call it as tobacco dependence, because there are certain other substances in tobacco which cause a sort of interplay between these compounds, and that lead to nicotine dependence. Now, okay, all this I sort of veered off the story. So when I actually started smoking, it was maybe one or two cigarettes a day, and over time, like I said, it finally peaked at around 30 or 40 a day. And I was during my younger days, during my teenage, during my college years, I was super fit. I used to play football for the university. I used to box for the university, and I also used to play for a third division club in Bangalore, soccer. But all that changed. So when you start to smoke so much, your whole level of fitness goes down. Before you know it, you're coughing, you're sneezing, you're catching infections left and right. So of course, so I knew that I had to quit. It was actually taking a toll on my health, and I tried to quit. So starting maybe 2009 or 10. In fact, uh, way back, this was in 2009 when the first e-cigarette was introduced. So it was a very basic prototype. It was a cartomizer. So that basically it looked like a cigarette. It was what you call a cigarette nowadays. It looked like a cigarette. You had to charge it, and it has these small nicotine-filled cartridges. It didn't work very well. Hmm. Unfortunately, it didn't work that great. So I did buy those. I actually remember intending to quit, and I bought those in Bangalore. Didn't work. I threw it away. Went back to smoking. Over the years, I've tried multiple things. I was part of the varenicline trial. In fact, I was part of the varenicline trial in India. That's a drug called Champix. I was one of the researchers for that. In fact, I had to enroll my own patients for this trial, and I also enrolled myself, of course. So it helped me very well for about 3 months. But once the trial was over time, again, I relapsed back. So within 6 months, I was back on cigarettes. Then I tried nicotine pouches, patches, gums, everything. So nothing really works. Unfortunately, what I found was over the years, with every attempt, I started losing confidence. And it was getting very bad. So much so, I even tried psychotherapy, I tried counseling, I tried hypnotism. Still didn't work, because while it is going on, you're still okay. But once you stop whatever you're doing, because you obviously can't do these things indefinitely. So once you stop them, you realize that the stress doesn't go away, and you somehow veer back into some sort of usage of tobacco. The other thing I've noted, see, somewhere around 2016 or 17, I think it was 17. So the day after my birthday, in fact, on my birthday, I was coughing so much. I literally thought that I'll have to go to the hospital and get admitted. So the next day, I happened to drive into one of the stores in Gurgaon, and I saw I saw an e-cigarette, one of the later generations. This was by ITC, in fact. Hmm. And I actually started that. I just bought it on a whim, and with the first puff, that's when I realized that everything has changed, because I just didn't want to go back. It just worked like magic. The day I used it, I still had a pack of cigarettes with me, and I still have that pack of cigarettes. So in one pack, you get 20 cigarettes. There are still 18 over there, because I I read online about the vaping challenge, where you vape for, let's say, I think it was 15 or 20 days, roughly 2 or 3 weeks, and then you try and smoke a cigarette. You will not be able to finish it. That was a challenge. So it was true, because after 15 days, I tried to smoke my first cigarette in that 15 days time, and I just couldn't finish it. I just couldn't. The flavor was so off, the taste was so horrible, I just threw it away. I tried the same thing after a month. That's where the second cigarette went. I still have that pack of 18 cigarettes to remind me of my journey. So that's when I had the first day when I used the vape, I had two striking ideas in my mind. Number one was, this is awesome because I'm still getting the hit of nicotine, but without any harms. Number two was, this was very selfish of me. I thought, I hope nobody finds out, because I had an inkling even then that, having been part of the anti-tobacco movement in my younger years, the kind of rabid fanaticism that the anti-tobacco movement views anything opposed to its views. So for them, it's abstinence or death. So if you want to use cigarettes, you're welcome to that, or you're welcome to quit completely and join them. That's how they look at things. There's no gray area there. So if you talk to any of these guys about the use of nicotine gums and nicotine patches, which is actually recommended by WHO, they are actually against even this idea. Some of them have tried to coerce. They have tried to coerce the health ministry into making these available only on prescription. Even a nicotine lozenge or a pouch, yes,
which is disturbing because you can buy cigarettes without a prescription.
precisely,
But
precisely. So there was one study actually. This was, I think, this was in this was in one of our South Asian countries, and there was a second study from China as well, which showed the same thing. So the problem with making these available on a prescription. Now, the large majority of users of tobacco do not identify as patients. They do not identify as people with a problem. They only identify as social smokers. They only identify as, somebody who can quit anytime, right? So such people going to a doctor, admitting that they have a problem, and then getting a prescription for it, that creates a barrier. So the moment you make things prescription only, you've excluded the large number. The number is around 70 or 80% who identify as social users of tobacco. So there itself, you excluded them from this whole uh, way to reduce harms, right? So that's the biggest problem with the prescription only model. Now, going back to this, so if you actually look at it, when I started using vapes, that was the easiest way I have ever found to date to quit. I've tried every single method possible, and this was so easy. It was so intuitive. You had the hand to mouth action, you had the throat hit, you had the vapor coming out. It just simulated the effect of the cigarette completely, including the hit of nicotine. So I wasn't missing anything. It was the easiest way to quit. Now there itself, there is this term that we all use called as imposter syndrome. Where you think that the role that you're filling in, you are not really suited for that role, or you don't really deserve all the money and the credits that come your way. It's very similar. So when something like this is so easy to quit, you start having second thoughts. Are you really quitting? So I had that. So what I did was, I went online. Now there are hundreds of websites. Some of them are completely anti-vaping. Some of them are pro-vaping. But I think it's better to go to respected sources of information. So what I did was, I visited the NHS site, National Health System. So National Health Services of the UK. In a nutshell, it's the government hospitals of UK, right? In the UK, the whole system is built on the NHS, because it's taxpayer funded, it's government hospitals. So the the overwhelming treatments that are offered there are based on the best evidence possible, because there's absolutely no game. I mean, there's absolutely no money involved. There's absolutely no commercial aspects. So if you look at, for example, in the US, that system is broken. In the UK, so they set the tone when you're trying to talk about evidence-based medicine. We use the guidelines exhaustively, because there, it's in the best interest of the patients. They are weighing all the evidence available, and they're looking at what is the best way possible to help the largest number of people. So that is where I went to for my information, and it was such a relief when I read all the things that were on the resources. I would recommend everybody should visit these resources and please read about it. So one of the statements that I read, which actually brought a big sigh of relief to me, was, if you're vaping, you're not smoking. That was number one. It said very clearly that, if you're vaping, you're no longer using tobacco, you're no longer smoking. So that itself, you know, that was the end point. You quit tobacco. So your vaping means you quit tobacco. The path to quitting tobacco can be different for many people. See, the world population is, I think, over 7 or 8 billion, right? I'm really bad with numbers. See, there, how can you say one approach will work for everybody? That's madness.
Absolutely, you can't. You
That's
definitely can't.
madness. Yes. So everybody needs a different approach, and everybody's journey is different. Everybody's unique. That's what we are taught. So for me, it was so easy to quit, but not everybody finds it that way. So there are numerous studies now. There's a mounting, unignorable global body of evidence which supports this finding that vaping is now the most popular and the most effective way of quitting tobacco. So, when this kind of development happens, one would think that all these people who are actually fighting tobacco would be ecstatic about it. But then they've doubled down and they've changed the goalposts. So earlier it was quit tobacco, now it's quit nicotine. So, they just shifted the whole thing entirely. There was no talk about quitting nicotine, but now suddenly they have made it about quitting nicotine. Of course, see, earlier I think there was no safer way of getting nicotine, but now there are hundreds of safer ways. In fact, uh, the vapes available nowadays, most of the disposables, most of the e-liquids available, make use of synthetic nicotine, which is
What is
made in
synthetic?
the lab. Synthetic nicotine is made in the lab. Majority of the nicotine, 99% of the nicotine produced in the world comes from tobacco. But 1% is actually made in the lab from scratch. So, which means it is completely tobacco free. Absolutely. So, it's cleaner than your. See, most of the big pharma companies who make lozenges and patches, they still use tobacco sourced nicotine. That is actually from tobacco. But the vape companies are now using synthetic nicotine. So, actually, that makes them cleaner than the big pharma companies.
I'm just going to be a typical individual who's usually misinformed about information and say, if it is not natural, if it is artificial or synthetic or manufactured in a lab, is it not more harmful then compared to traditional nicotine extracted from tobacco, which is grown naturally?
So, they are chemically identical, number one. Number two is, see, the harms of tobacco do not stem from nicotine. The harms from tobacco actually stem from the other compounds in tobacco. Nicotine is what hooks you, and the other stuff, primarily the tar, and primarily something we call as TSNAs, which are basically tobacco specific nitrosamines. They are the cancer causing agents. They are the ones that kill you. Hmm? So, see, when you have something purified from tobacco, no matter how great your purification process, some amount of TSNAs will sneak in, right? But if you make it completely from a different source which doesn't have any of these TSNAs, that would, you know, that would make it safer, actually safer. Right?
That
So
arguably makes sense, but again, I have to bring out a weird contrasting point then, that carbon and diamond are very similar. They're also carbon, right? Sorry, coal and diamond. I mean, coal and diamond are also exactly the same thing. They're also carbon, and there's a huge difference between those two. So when you are saying synthetically manufactured nicotine, I understand the purification part, where there is no more of these other products which could have been harmful. But is this nicotine by itself just as harmless as you are saying natural nicotine is?
I would argue that it should be less harmful than even natural nicotine because of the process by which it's made. And I think comparing coal and diamonds are apples and oranges. I think if you want to compare it, it should be natural diamonds and synthetic diamonds. That is the in sort of thing right now. I don't know if you've heard they have managed to make. They've actually managed the process to make to make synthetic diamonds at uh, normal atmospheric pressure. Earlier, it required huge amount of atmospheric pressure and temperature. Now it doesn't. So oh, by the way, there's one thing I have to share.
Please,
You
please
can
go ahead.
remove this if it's not relevant. You can remove this. So I have stopped buying natural diamonds.
That's interesting. How come? Like I support you on that. Logically, as a mechanical engineer who understands material sciences, I have been screaming this for centuries, but society unfortunately has its quirks.
So I know I'm sure you bought your diamond. I'm sure you bought your share of diamonds. So the four C's of diamonds, right? I have to posit that there's a fifth C. Yeah, it's the buyer. So
It is actually the only C which matters. There is, if I'm not mistaken, there is absolutely no difference between a natural diamond and a lab diamond, other
Yes.
than the fact of what's written on it, right?
Yes.
And when
Yes.
you're trusting somebody else, and the world has seen its fair share of scrutinies
Yes.
and
Yes.
weird things which go around, right? We have
Yes.
our
Yes.
conspiracies which we've seen too. So what is stopping these people from writing natural on a man-made diamond and selling it at 10x the price? Right? So I have my tinfoil hat perpetually on when such things come
No,
up.
no. I have finally managed to convince the Home Ministry at my house that we should no longer be the fifth C. So yeah, going back to vapes. So I think we're talking about my journey before we digressed and went, I think, down the rabbit hole. So see, after quitting, then unfortunately there was the ban as well. So when I had gone online and done all these research, and I was extremely glad that there's now a method that makes quitting so easy. And then I read up on the history of the vaping movement as well. So interestingly, vaping was not invented by the tobacco companies, nor by any big sort of MNC or conglomerate. It was by a ex-smoker, and he became an ex-smoker by vaping. It was a chemist who wanted to quit and who understood nicotine. Because of that, so he made this device which was able to deliver nicotine minus the tobacco, and ergo less harmful than a cigarette. So that became, I mean, I mean, you can't stop an idea whose time has come. It's as simple as that. So I think it was the right time, and contrary to what people think, a person using tobacco is not an idiot. And even though many of the people in the tobacco movement like to talk over our heads, like to make decisions for us without involving us, like to think that we lack agency because we are addicted to nicotine. I actually take issue with that word because it doesn't fit the definition of any sort of habit of nicotine. But anyway, so when that happens, when you have a sort of a dependence on nicotine, that doesn't rob you of your functions. We don't bar people who smoke from driving a car. We don't bar them from sitting an exam. We don't bar them from offices. We don't bar them from uh, any sort of professions. We don't bar them from the parliament. So I don't think nicotine usage or nicotine dependence robs you of agency or robs you of your IQ. That is just, I mean, that is just plain offensive. That's actually something one should be offended by. So see, when I went and I did my own research, because there was a lot of noise on all this, whether it is good, some said it was safe, some said it is harmful, some said it was harmless. But at some point, see, you can listen to everybody, but you should make up your own mind, and that involves some amount of work on your part. So I went and tried to read up as much as I could about it. One sort of interesting thing that I remembered, this we are taught this during our MBBS in pharmacology. There we are taught that nicotine is not carcinogenic, but 90% of doctors in India believe that nicotine is carcinogenic. This is not just in India. In the US as well, this is a very, very sort of same numbers, similar numbers, where even a healthcare professional believes that nicotine is carcinogenic. Nicotine is habit forming, yes, but it's not carcinogenic. There are no studies in humans, there is no evidence to show that it has caused a cancer. There are a few scattered reports, there are a few scattered low quality animal sort of trials which shows something called as potentiation. What it means is somebody already has a cancer, this has shown some activity where it can worsen it. There are some other studies done on cell cultures. So cell cultures are basically they take the cells out of the body and they grow it in a dish, and they look at the effects of various toxins on those cells, right? So, in some of the cell cultures, when there was an exposure to any sort of irritant, for example, smoke or vape, they showed changes which we would associate with the onset or the chances of acquiring a tumor, a cancer. But that's not how the body works. These lab studies and actual life, I think there is a very, very wide gulf over there. The human body has its own defense mechanisms. Whenever it sort of identifies any cell which is trying to take that route, it has its own ways of stopping it. So that is the reason. Otherwise, you would think that if okay, forget all the science. Look at it from a realistic point of view. Cipla is one of the largest companies in India. They are making nicotine gum. Pfizer makes nicotine patches in the US. They have tons of money. Would they open themselves up to lawsuits by selling a cancer causing compound? They would just go bankrupt. It's as simple as that. So, uh, they are not naive. They would not do something where, they if something can impact their bottom line, they would never go down that route. And I think that says it all. So, if these patches and gums and lozenges are still around after decades, Hmm? by now, the safety has been well established. WHO endorses them. It's part of our national list of essential medicines. I don't think we need to fear nicotine so much. More important, it's the vessel in which nicotine is carried. So typically, it was tobacco. It used to be tobacco. Now we are lucky to have safer alternatives where it's just nicotine minus the tobacco, which means whatever harms there are would be negligible, and some things, you know life itself is risky at times. You go in the sun, you risk sunstroke. I mean, we in Delhi know about the heat wave going on, right? So you risk dehydration. You have too much of water, that can cause problems, right? So everything in life can be harmful, every single thing. Name one thing and I can tell you the harm. Consequently, we make choices that try to take the less harmful way. Zero harm, I don't think there's such a thing. I think we should stop deluding ourselves. So, if something is less harmful, substantially less harmful, I don't think there is any sort of doubt in my mind that we should be wholeheartedly accepting that, especially when the alternative is so deadly. In India alone, the we have a large number of deaths just from the usage of tobacco, and that's really sad. Every year, 8 million people. That's huge number.
So, with this in mind, I want to come and talk about a aspect regarding this vape ban, regarding the misinformation over here. There seems to be a lot of bias everyone has about nicotine, about vapes, right? And the users have a very positive bias towards it, where they'll defend it, and the non-users have a very negative bias towards it, where they say, "Why are you doing this? This is so dangerous, so harmful, and all." And you've addressed a lot of the points comparing these two, but then there is a whole other set of people who, like you said, are making decisions for us, right? And they are, in their mind, they're deciding that we are addicted and we can't decide for ourselves. Whereas, very rightfully, you said we can vote, we can give exams, we'll be held responsible for anything and everything which we do in societal norms. So we are responsible for everything else. But when it comes to making a decision about how we consume our nicotine, they suddenly say that, nope, you are not competent and we must make the decision for you. And we would rather you smoke or quit cold turkey, but not have access to vaping. That is their stand which they've taken. And now I have a very tough time wrapping my head around this bias that smoke, quit cold turkey, but no vape. That seems to be a strong bias against vaping in specific. And these people have no reason, because they don't even understand it, they don't use it, they don't empathize with the consumers, but they try to make a policy around it. What could be the cause of their bias? And
Yeah. So we have tried to understand what is leading to this kind of attitude. So there are a number of viewpoints. A few of them are like, for example, one of the things is, because of decades of their war against tobacco, hmm, they have sort of internalized this message that the only way to win is to completely abstain from all forms of tobacco. For them, in their mind, they've conflated tobacco and nicotine. Like I was saying earlier, there was no other way of getting nicotine apart from tobacco. So that's why, so in their minds, it's one. Nicotine is the same as tobacco. And that message has been internalized to such a large extent that they cannot comprehend that you can have one without the other. The other thing, I mean, the other more what you call cynical view, I would say, is it hits their livelihood. So no more deaths from tobacco would make their jobs redundant. No more grants, no more money. They'll have to find a different job. And there are a few very powerful individuals in the world. One of them is, of course, a well-known billionaire from the US, Michael Bloomberg. So he donates a huge amount of money to the WHO, and he also sets up grants. He is completely against vaping for certain reasons that are not well articulated, and he tries to influence policies, especially in developing countries, through the NGOs. So this is actually very very interesting. So the one of the NGOs was caught in the Philippines trying to draft their national law on tobacco. Same with Mexico. When they were actually discovered that a foreign entity is writing your local laws, your national laws, hmm, that was shocking. And luckily, that was found out in time. It led to a huge backlash, of course. But see, WHO unfortunately has to depend on funds, I guess. You know, otherwise, uh, at this point, after COVID, I think they've lost a they've lost a huge bunch of credibility. Even before COVID, if you just Google stuff like Haiti, for example, They cause the they I would say they cause the problems in a lot of places in the world. Hmm? Not just WHO, it's the UN as a whole. Rather, the Haiti episode was the UN causing a cholera epidemic in Haiti. So, it's not that they are above reproach, but so far we found, or we would look up to them as people who have devoted their lives to public health and trying their best to make a difference in a very complicated world. But now what's happening is, even in the face of evidence, when you have people who trying to peddle misinformation, one loses patience, whether it's with the WHO, whether it's with any of the national bodies, our health ministry. So you try your best to make them look at your point of view. But if somebody doesn't even want to talk to you, they don't want to engage, they don't want to even look at the evidence, or they want to cherry pick, that becomes very very tiring, and that leads you to a different opinion on why they're really doing this, whether it's actually in the interest of public health. So overall, okay, in a nutshell, if you look at public health, what should be the objective of public health? Improve the health of the public. Simple. Save as many lives as you can, improve their lot in life. That is basically the overarching goal of public health. The anti-tobacco movement in India, unfortunately, is focused on abstinence only. Globally, the success rate of abstinence is around 7 to 10%. In India, it's around 3 to 4%. And this, when I say 3 to 4%, it's of the number of people who actually want to quit, not even looking at the people who don't want to quit. So, you're failing 95% plus of the people who actually are ripe for quitting. And then you call it a victory. So just imagine. So you are at a big, you are at a giant concert, right? And there is a very very small exit. The hall is packed. There's a very very small exit where only 3 or 4 people can leave at a time. The other side are the windows. The hall is on the ground floor. You can break the windows and jump out. But the authorities are standing outside with guns. They don't want anybody to break the windows and jump out. They want them to suffocate in that hall because it's on fire. And they want them to come to the gate and walk out 3 at a time or 4 at a time. It doesn't matter to them that a large number of people die in the process. I think that is the best analogy one can have about this mindless opposition to harm reduction, especially tobacco harm reduction, which is so easy. If you substitute tobacco with nicotine, without the harms of tobacco, you save countless lives straight away. But if you're focused on saying no, we have to quit everything, including nicotine, the number of people you actually end up helping is a very small number. Now, mind you, the people who go on to safer forms of nicotine, safer, not completely harmless, but nothing in life actually is, they are not going to die. They live far healthier lives because the alternative is death from tobacco. So I think that is something that is very, very difficult for us to comprehend as to why somebody is persisting in this. Now, the other major problem, of course, is the huge amount of taxes that the government gets from the tobacco trade. And in India, it's a little bit complicated again. That word pops up. So the government, through its stake in ITC, it has roughly 27 to 30% stake in ITC. Hmm? It produces tobacco. It makes cigarettes. So it's literally selling cigarettes to you, fueling your addiction, fueling your habit, fueling your dependence, and then collecting taxes from you. So it gets you coming and going. And the amounts we're talking about are astronomical, 55,000 crores. That was, I think, it's maybe a 3 or 4 year old figure, but I would expect it has grown. And fun fact, last few years, they have not raised the taxes on tobacco. So, still they are able to earn so much. I don't think they would want realistically speaking, the kind of policies that we are seeing, I don't think they are serious about people quitting tobacco because they just need the money. They just need those taxes. And that is really sad. Worldwide, going back to the UK again, the government there has wholeheartedly embraced vaping. Vapes are being prescribed by the NHS. It's part of the guidelines for quitting smoking. And the UK government also launched the Swap to Stop program. So, 1 in 5 smokers would get a free vape kit. 1 in 5 smokers. This was for 1 million. They had 5 million smokers totally. So, 1 in 5 would get a free vape kit. 1 million vape kits for free. They are really serious about people quitting smoking. So, the other argument that we often see is children get hooked to vapes because they're so attractive to the children. But see, unfortunately, children have been using tobacco too. The sad part is we have a global survey every few years. So the latest one, the Global Youth Tobacco Survey, showed that the age of starting tobacco use in India was 12. Average age 12.
which
So you
sounds
have a
reasonable.
12-year-old.
Personally started smoking at about 15, and
Okay.
class 10th got over, and just to celebrate my boards getting over. It could be anything. The needs are very different. Why somebody picks up smoking can vary from peer pressure to a celebratory one to just dealing with stress. There are too many reasons why it can be, but you're absolutely correct. Even when vaping did not exist, and I knew exactly how bad, just like you, I would also make fun of everyone who was a smoker, and yet I picked up that first cigarette, and that's all it takes is that first one to get addicted to it. So I agree with you when you're saying that the younger generation, even without the presence of vapes, will still go to smoking. That cannot be stopped.
So there's one very unpopular opinion, which I think merits some thought and discussion. What would you rather have? You would rather have a kid picking up a deadly habit that's going to kill him, with basically a cigarette or some sort of gutka or some sort of tobacco, or would you rather have him vape and not kill himself? It is an unpopular opinion because you have people, the visual imagery of vaping. It is so because you have these clouds coming out, you have these vapes coming out, which is not smoke exactly, it's vapor. But that sort of attracts attention many times. So whenever that happens, it has its own shock value. So parents, when they look at their children vaping, they're like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" Smoking was always going on. Vapes are displacing cigarettes. It's not that children started use of tobacco only when vaping started. Absolutely what you said. They were already using some sort of tobacco. There was a survey in the UK again, going back to this place. So UK, they had a survey about usage of vapes among underaged, right? So what it showed was those who had already smoked some form of tobacco were the ones who were persistent in using vapes. Those who had never used any form of tobacco, they would experiment with vapes because of their friends doing it. Some sort of because there's a lot of messaging in the UK which is accurate, which tells you that vapes are a fraction of the risks. They initially came out with a number that said 95% safer than a cigarette. Now they have changed it and they have said substantially less risky than a cigarette because the 95% number would rile up all the anti-tobacco activists. So, but they still say, see, it's okay. Why do they say it? We should not just accept something at face value because somebody is saying it. I think that is wrong. If you're going to have a logical thought about this, the dose makes the poison. What you're vaping, what you're inhaling, what you're putting into your body, how much of it you're putting into your body is going to make a difference to how harmful it is to you, right? So a cigarette has roughly about 4,000 odd chemicals, and a lesser order of magnitude, about in the hundreds. They are you have multiple carcinogens there. Nobody says that one cigarette will cause cancer because it's not true. It's a sustained use of a cigarette for decades, which will lead to a higher risk of catching a cancer, of developing a cancer. Sorry. With a vape, the amount of all these compounds is drastically down. In fact, most of the tobacco is out. They're right there. All you have is nicotine, no tobacco. You have flavorings, and you have two other ingredients called vegetable glycerine and propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is already there in those inhalers for asthma, so it's not something that is unknown. All these compounds have been studied, have been, and see, the vape industry has also learned on the spot. They have made changes, they've made improvements, they've purified many of the top countries in Europe, New Zealand. They have got regulations in place where what can be allowed, what is the packet size, what are the warnings you need to have, who can it be sold to. So regulation is key to implementing what actually goes into the vape bottle. Right now, the dose makes the poison. It's as simple as that. So when we say something is actually going to cause cancer, you have to look at what is the duration, what is the amount that you're putting into your body, and how long you're putting into your body before you start to see changes associated with cancer. Unfortunately, one of the tactics followed by the anti-tobacco group, what they did was they were alarmed by the number of people switching to vaping. They were really alarmed because this was something they could not control. So what they did, there was a paper out. So I will have this. I'll have this sent over to you. You could include a link somewhere because it's a very important paper that we all must read. The paper laid down helpful suggestions about how to combat vapes. One of them was never ever compare vapes with cigarettes. Seriously, never ever compare vapes with cigarettes. That was one of the statements in that paper. So this was about, it was more of a toolkit for all these people how to debate people who are for vaping. So you look at a study, you dissect a study, or you do a study, and you don't compare it to cigarettes. You do a study only on vaping.
So there, we've become aware about dark patterns and how the top psychologists and behaviorists in the world have been working with tech companies to get you addicted to their social media platforms and everything. I wouldn't be surprised if this toolkit was developed by such people working for these activists who are trying to stop vaping, because see, this is human behavior at its peak. We are easy to be influenced, we can be tempted, and we can be made to act like sheep, and that is what they're doing. They're using the rest of the population as sheep and making them believe that vaping is bad. And once they all believe vaping is bad and they've secured their funding through the vape tobacco users, they've secured their votes through the rest of the sheep. Now they can have policies where vaping is banned and tobacco stays into existence. And this is some high level conspiracy if we are able to find hardcore proof, that paper being one of them for sure.
Yeah. And one more thing in that paper which was very interesting was, uh, look at possible harms caused by the ingredients in the vape, and disseminate information, which is code for raise alarms. So one of the scares was popcorn lung. I'm sure you heard of it, popcorn lung, right? So popcorn lung doesn't mean your lungs look like popcorn. That's wrong. So it's a medical condition called bronchiolitis obliterans, which basically the smallest part of the airway, hmm, they tend to get blocked off. So this was first found in a workers in a popcorn factory. That's why it's called popcorn lung. There they use flavorings called diacetyl, which gives you the butter flavor. So when you're making butter popcorn, it has an artificial flavoring, yes, and that is diacetyl. So diacetyl inhalation causes bronchiolitis obliterans. Yes. Problem is, in a cigarette, you have three orders of magnitude. Okay, one order of magnitude is tens, then hundreds, then thousand. So a, a vape versus a cigarette. A cigarette has 1,000 times more diacetyl than a vape. Before vapes came along, we never heard of anybody getting popcorn lung by smoking a cigarette. So why this sudden alarm of somebody getting popcorn lung by smoking vapes or by vaping? I would not say smoking vapes. That's wrong. So by vaping, when the amount of diacetyl which was there was negligible, how could you even get it? So then we did a little bit of digging into this. So what we realized is the researchers went into the list of ingredients or list of compounds identified in a vaping cloud, and they just ran them through the database. So if you found something, right, chances are it would cause some harm in a big enough concentration. You don't mention the concentration, you just say, oh, this can cause this, ergo vapes cause this. So that's how you get the scares. That's how you get you get all the major problems. So one of the consequences of the ban is you lost all regulatory oversight. You don't know what these people are going to put into it. You don't know whom they're going to sell it to, right? You go to any small pawn shop anywhere in the country. Forget Delhi. Anywhere in the country, you can get a vape. Kids can get it. So it's not that you've not protected the kids. One of the reasons for the ban was to protect our kids. We failed abysmally, right? And now you don't know what people are going to put into it. One of the bigger problems. So one of the justifications for the ban was EVALI. Remember EVALI? Yes. So EVALI, so-called EVALI, stands for e-cigarette or vaping associated lung injury. What happened was it was a very localized, geographically localized outbreak of severe lung injury in a small group of people in the US. It happened. It was limited only to the US, and it was limited by time. It happened only in a few months. In a majority of these people, majority I would say almost 90-95%, they were found to have been using black market vapes for THC, which actually contain THC, which is basically marijuana. So they were using marijuana vapes which were sort of contaminated or cut with vitamin E acetate. So it's actually the vitamin E acetate which is something to dissolve the THC. THC is fat soluble. So vitamin E acetate is a solvent for basically THC. Nicotine, on the other hand, is water soluble. You don't need vitamin E acetate. There's no reason to put vitamin E acetate in a nicotine containing vape, right? But then look at the irony. EVALI was actually caused by black market vapes, which contain THC. Black market thrives when stuff is banned. So we used EVALI to create a black market. Irony, I can think. So you know, I was very taken aback. I was very dismayed by the ban. I have to tell you that. So, in the months leading up to the ban, there were various ordinances by the state government which AVI challenged, and I was very glad to see that. In fact, I also reached out, I sent some money along, and I was very happy that somebody was taking the fight to the government. But then came in the bill itself. Hmm? And in the bill, once it was banned, the months leading up to that, I remember because many of my closest friends whom I had introduced to vaping, they called me up and they were like very worried. What if this gets banned? We'll have to go back to cigarettes. And I was very dismissive. I said, "There's no chance they can ban it. It's 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 a no-brainer. The day they ban it, it would be untenable because cigarettes are freely available. How can you ban something that's 95% plus safer than a cigarette, but leave the cigarettes freely available? That would just make no sense. The courts would strike it down. That's what I thought. And I kept telling them, don't worry, it's never going to happen. But then the day it happened, the day it was announced, I was so taken aback. And of course, that was a tough time. I think it was a tough time for all of us. Hmm. Luckily, I had already started making my own e-liquid. So this was like a few months down because I always like to experiment with flavors. So I had a sufficient stash. I think most of my friends also had a sufficient stash. After that, see, like I said, it's not difficult finding a vape in India. Fun fact, a recent KPMG study, which I was actually part of the group that released it, it says that now we have 8.8% vapors in India. So from zero point 0.5 or 1%, it has jumped to 8.8%. And that should be seen as a public health win. Despite its best efforts, smokers don't want to die.
No,
So,
that is very true.
yeah, absolutely. I think Darwin would be happy looking at this. So, so the ban itself came as a big blow. And after that, I reached out to AVI. I joined one of the groups. And then I also got in touch with AHRER. I initially joined as a member. It's about 6 months after AHRER was formed, I joined as a member. So the erstwhile leader of AHRER, very focused and driven, and I like the voice, I like the direction that AHRER was taking. It was in the forefront of harm reduction. It still is. So that's where I decided to devote more of my time. I decided to help because, to be very frank, I mean, it's not difficult for people uh, like us to stay away from cigarettes. Once we have seen how easy it is to be healthy, once we have seen how easy it is to actually not suffer the ill effects of tobacco, we are not going back. We'll find ways, we'll find the money, we'll find the ways to get it. That's all right. But what about the millions of people in India? 200, there are 200 million plus 280 million tobacco users, 80 million smoke either cigarettes or BDs, 200 million use oral tobacco. So, what about all these 280 million people who don't have this choice or who have been given wrong information? I have people who tell me that vaping is more dangerous than smoking. I'm like, where do they get this? So that is what's happening. So you have these people in the anti-tobacco group who are now so virulently anti-vape that they don't realize what they're doing. For them, in their minds, they are trying to prevent the youth from getting into vaping. Problem is, see, just like you can't advertise a product only to adults, the youth will see it, the children will see it, right? Similarly, you can't target a message to kids without having adults see it too. I think that's the flip side. So you have a product which actually is designed to help users of tobacco to quit. You don't want people who have never used tobacco to take it up. Although you continue to ignore the studies which say that somebody who's not going to smoke or use any form of tobacco is not going to continue using it. So a negligible number, about 1.2% or somebody who's nicotine naive, which means they've never used any form of tobacco, they sort of use vapes, or they sort of continue to use vapes after experimenting. The majority of them, they don't go back to it. But you want to save a small number of youth, you want to prevent them from getting into vaping, but the large number of adults who are already using tobacco, you don't worry if they die. And I think that was a shocking thing. So COP10, which happened in Panama, there was this bunch of children in the end who moved some sort of resolution where they said that their rights or their safety should not be imperiled by the rights of smokers and users of tobacco. So it should not be their rights supersede the lives of tobacco users. This is the message that was endorsed by the WHO, which is shocking, which is ridiculous. You know, apart from that, I think, see, then of course, my going back to my journey with AHRER, I started getting more vocal about this because as I sort of immersed myself more and more into harm reduction, more and more into the principles underlying this, I started to educate myself. I started to look at the studies. I started to look at what's actually going on. What's the big picture? What's the number of people actually using it? Is it working? What are the harms? So I'm yet to see any serious harms associated with vaping. Smoking, using tobacco, we all know the harms, right? Vaping, it's more of fear mongering, it's more of panicking, it's more of, oh my god, my children are doing it. Oh my god, look, it's more dangerous than smoking. So I think that kind of messaging is so sort of pervasive right now that many nationwide surveys in the West have actually shown that change. Earlier, people would believe correctly that vaping is less harmful than smoking. But now that number has reduced. Now there are more number of people who believe that smoking is less harmful than vaping, which is, I don't know what to say about that. So, thankfully, for us, I think the journey has been good so far because there are promising signs. See, at AHRER, now I am, of course, leading AHRER along with Dr. Aparajit Kar. Both of us are directors in AHRER. So, we have been engaging with the government. We have reached out to the health ministry. And we have been asking for a few things. We have been asking for a few things. One of them, primarily, and this is very close to my heart, very close to what you also said, that none of these anti tobacco people know what it feels like to be a smoker, know what it feels like to use tobacco. So we have been pushing for representation of current and former tobacco users on the National Tobacco Control Cell. I think that's very important. Nothing about us without us. That's like human rights. And this has been held true even by the Supreme Court when it came to disability rights. You can't make policies for a people, for a whole group, without taking their views into account. So that is something we have been pushing for. We have also been pushing for inclusion of psychiatrists and behavioral experts in the National Tobacco Control Cell because I think, see, if you recognize that the usage of tobacco, it's basically a habit, it's basically dependence. You can't treat dependence by drugs alone. You need the insights of psychiatrists, you need the insights of behavioral experts, de addiction specialists, in order to sort of come up with a plan, come up with options. So, this is what we have been requesting them, and we've reached out to them on this. The other thing, in other good news, of course, is now nicotine is part of the national list of essential medicines. So, we have also reached out to the government. See, reaching out to the government, and we have told them the larger problem in India. Now, what happens is the perception in India is that cigarettes are the biggest problem when it comes to tobacco. I mean, but if you look at the usage pattern, which is unique to India, out of around 30% of the population uses some form of tobacco. 4% use cigarettes. Only 4%. 7% use BDs. And 20% of the entire population are actually using smokeless tobacco. Gutka, zarda, kheni, etc. Yes, yes, yes. And that works out to 200 million plus, which is actually using oral tobacco as compared to 28 million cigarette smokers and 72 million BD smokers. So 200 million is the number that we can actually help by using any form of these nicotine substitutions. So we have not told them that you start giving these people vapes. Instead, what we have told them is, look, nicotine is now part of national list of essential medicines. So nicotine gums and nicotine patches are already available in your it's already available in the pharmacies world, in nationwide. Why don't we have the government subsidize these? Because the people who generally use oral tobacco tend to be from a poorer background. So government can subsidize these, supply it through the primary health centers and the community health centers to the people who use oral tobacco. For an oral tobacco user, switching to a gum or a lozenge is actually going to help. Gums and lozenges, research has actually showed that they're not very effective for smokers because there's no hand to mouth action. The sort of there are a major number of behavioral cues that are missing from this sort of oral NRTs. So when you're trying to use oral nicotine with this group, it might have a larger chance of success. So that's what we have also proposed. Apart from these, we've also proposed a slew of other measures. But I think it's very close to the elections. Hopefully, we'll hear back. Although the sense we got initially when they responded to us was very positive. We were very happy with that. So hopefully, we can take it forward and we can do something there. I think what I would like, see, the wish list, or rather something I would uh, take for this is, see, vaping is already widespread in India. We are losing revenue, we are losing taxes, of course, and we have no control over it. Hmm. One more thing that I actually forgot was we exhorted them not to make policies they can't enforce.
Very important.
Yes. So first you ban it, and then you say, oh, we don't have the capacity to enforce it. It's not a new thing. You never had the capacity to enforce it. It did not happen after the ban. We never had it. Otherwise, you would not see a child picking up a cigarette at age of 12 if you had the capacity to enforce it. You can't enforce Kotpa, forget about Pika. So the same rules where you have regulation. See, alcohol is also not meant for children. Neither is cigarettes, neither is tobacco, neither is any form of nicotine, right? It's not meant for children. So the same way that you have enforced age restrictions, have an age restriction for vaping. It is time to legalize it. I think the science is irrefutable. A major. So, what I would urge everybody to do is there are a few things that one must be. One, of course, being the NHS resources. The other is the Cochrane review. So, there's a living review. So, the Cochrane collaboration, the Cochrane Foundation does review of reviews, what we call as meta analysis or systematic review. So, see, when you have a study, when you have a clinical study, right? So, you take a bunch of people, you take either drug A or drug B, you divide that bunch of people into two, and you study the effects on one versus the other. This is the layman's version of how we would explain what a study does. But a meta analysis is a study of studies. So, you take a number of studies studying the same thing, you combine them together, and then you analyze them. So the best quality of evidence is a meta-analysis or a systematic review. That's what the Cochrane Foundation does. And they have established that nicotine containing vapes are twice as effective as compared to NRTs for quitting tobacco. And they have not established any harm so far. There is a review in progress where they're looking at what is the youth uptake. How many youth who have never used any form of tobacco would go on to vaping? They're also looking at that, and the result should be out maybe in about a few months. But look at such sources of evidence which are high quality. Whenever you read a paper, see, it's headline grabbing stuff which comes in papers. Always try to find the source. What is the source of this news? If you can, if you have time, Google it, find the source, read it. One thing you must always pay attention to: what are vapes trying to displace? They're trying to displace tobacco. If the study does not compare vapes with tobacco, I don't think it has much value. We are looking at harm reduction. But harm reduction from what? from tobacco. You have the harm of tobacco, you're trying to reduce it. If you just look at the harm of nicotine, if you just look at the harm of vapes in isolation, it will look very scary. But then you have to ask yourself, see, if the amount of all those dangerous substances is less than what is normally there in your ambient room air, I'm not even talking about Delhi. Pick any clean country, pick any clean particulate. So if you're smelling that cow dung, you're breathing it. So everything is going into your body. So stuff like that, if you're looking at it in isolation, it can be very scary. There's a term for that. It's called zonerism. So this actually described the I don't know if you heard of it, DHMO. So DHMO is dihydrogen monoxide. So dihydrogen monoxide is one of the widely available and most dangerous substances.
I've
It's
heard of this. It's
yes,
it's odorless, it's tasteless, it's extremely dangerous.
yes, it's a major constituent of acid rain. It actually eats away at metal. It eats away at coastlines, hmm, and it's also called as water. So if you breathe it, you die.
You had me for a split second there, but then I didn't want to spoil it for you also. Yeah.
Yeah. So scaring somebody is easy. But I think what one needs to recognize is you have a brain. It's time you used it. Google, do your own research. Don't even listen to me. Just go and do your own research. Make up your own minds. Hmm? And if you're smoking, try to quit. If you use any form of tobacco, I think it's high time you quit. Because tobacco is deadly. There's no two ways about it. If you can't quit, switch to some form of safer alternative. I won't tell you where to find it, but again, you have a brain, right? You know where to find it. So I'll just leave you with some figures. I think these numbers are very important. There was a study in 2016, Ketan et al. So that said, this is in the US. 70% of smokers want to quit. 70%. 7% manage to quit. 7%. And on average, it takes 30 attempts for a smoker to quit. 30. And the more number of attempts that you pass through, the less the chances of quitting for good. Hmm? So if you can quit, great. But just like I said initially, that everybody is unique. Don't assume that quitting cold turkey is for everybody. If it is, great. Now, nobody is casting aspersions on you. It's not about willpower. Which is basically incorrect. It is similar. It has a similar kind of dependence potential. I would not say addiction again. It was the same kind of dependence potential as heroin. Would you tell a heroin addict that you quit with willpower alone? When you say stuff like that, and then you say, "Oh no, you just quit." You have to want it. You have to really will it, and you need your friend support and your family support and blah blah blah. You have to treat it as a proper. If you have to treat it as a proper dependence, you need pharmacological help. Sometimes you need nicotine. For many people, nicotine serves other functions, certain positive functions, especially if you look at the ADHD community, look at people with Parkinson's. For them, it actually serves purpose. It helps them. It helps them cope with daily life, with stress. So many people who would want to self medicate, unfortunately, they tend to get hooked. And those cigarettes, gutka, zarda, khani, they kill them. So for such people for whom quitting is not feasible, I think it's important to switch to a safer alternative and save lives. So I think for this World Vaping Day, I think it's time to realize that we all have a voice. We should be doing what our so-called people in tobacco control have lost sight of. Saving lives should be the primary function of tobacco control, saving lives from tobacco, rather than trying to declare war on tobacco, rather than trying to eradicate nicotine, which is not possible. Bans, I don't think they work. Look at Gujarat. You can buy alcohol in Gujarat, and Gujarat is like known for having the longest dry spell, which is ridiculous. So when you try to be a nanny state, when you try to police stuff, when you try to prohibit stuff, it just spirals out of control, and then you've lost the plot completely. So this is one of the examples of an unenforceable policy. Make policies which enable rather than coerce. I'll give you a quick example. So instead of ban, if we had gone the route of the Philippines, so what the Philippines did is very interesting. They did not ban vapes after it came to light that Bloomberg was interfering. They actually regulated them, and they regulated it differently from smokes. So you have these smoking areas in restaurants, correct? So there you have vaping areas where you can't smoke. You can only vape. And the taxes are lower on a vape than a cigarette. So those are enabling policies. You tax both, fine, but you tax it according to the level of risk. The more riskier the thing, you tax it more. You make it less appealing to the consumer, but at the same time, give him an alternative. So that's an enabling policy. And you also give him the information, the correct information, which is more risky, which is likely to kill you, which is not likely to kill you. But yes, best cease completely, stop the usage completely if you can. If you can't, at least go to this. It will not kill you. This is substantially less harmful. So that kind of information coupled with policies that enable the switch, I think that is something that would really make a difference.
And thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today. Right before we end on this World Vape Day, just have one small message for you. If you are a smoker who quit smoking with the help of vape, congratulations to you. It's not been a small victory, it's been a big one. And to combat your nicotine dependence, along with that, to combat all the misinformation and the propaganda by the people, it is fantastic. Kudos to you, a job well done. We understand it's really difficult to talk sense to the other person because they've got a lot of bias. The other side is hell bent on making you believe that smoking is less harmful than vaping, but it is not so. We urge people to open up their minds, read actual scientific journals and discoveries, and read these papers, the research papers, which are giving undisputable information and evidence towards what is undoubtedly true, where vaping is a much safer alternative. And with that, on World Vape Day, be strong. A better time is about to come. Thank you.